time?
Well, I think, so one of the things that we see that's taking place, so I'm just going to take a step back and then answer your 3 points. One of the things that we see that's been happening quite a lot with the teams and leaders we're working with is they're operating on some form of a continuum, which we call going from overstimulation to slack. So the initial period sees a lot of panic and a lot of, oh my God, how am I going to manage all this? How am I going to do this? And then there's sort of this, sort of easiness coming in where, things are, where the pace of life has suddenly stopped and this almost going into slack or demotivation, and then coming back into the space of, oh my God, but I'm not making revenue. I have to manage the teams. I have to, sort of manage, the sentiments of people. So it's really the first step to all of it is being able to manage yourself. I mean, bolting on to what, sort of Shalini said is, as a leader today, if you can't manage yourself, or as a leader ever, if you can't manage yourself, you can't manage anything. So it's really being able to first focus on yourself. The second is, we've gone from a platform where your colleagues or your teams were next door. They were just outside, and you could just go and you could just go across and access them quite easily, and you knew what everybody was doing. Here, you kind of have to trust that everyone is doing the job that they're supposed to do and in the capacity that they can operate. So it's a combination of, sort of demonstrating an understanding towards their situation and trusting that each person there is focused and is willing to give to that situation. Because especially we see this very, very often with leaders. They're so used to micromanaging that just this aspect of letting go, accepting and just allowing people to be is a very challenging one. And the other thing is, people are moving in the corporate space from becoming your colleague. You saw them in a particular environment, they behaved a particular way, you had a particular conversation with them, to now they're becoming individuals and they're becoming people. So it's a lot of it, focused on just social sensitivity. And as a result, just communication that comes into it. And really being able to sensitize your communication to address the challenges. So, a lot of the companies, a lot of the leaders that we work with said, I never used to really ask about somebody's family or what was happening in their lives. And suddenly I have so much more access to them as an individual rather than just a colleague. And I'm being able to understand what they're going through a lot more, which is helping me help them manage their situation, their work, their tasks, their targets better. So I think it's really, coming down to those 3 things: empathy and understanding, trust, and just and being socially sensitive, but most importantly, being able to manage yourself. And when you manage yourself, you can effectively communicate well, and you can also be able to integrate people in a way that you couldn't do before. So that's really the 3 points of how we
leading others, starting with self. And I suppose that's where that narrative of put your own oxygen mask on first before trying to help other people.
Yes.
The word resilience is being used so often these days. At Thrive, we've been running this assessment across all the organizations that we work with. So a little bit of data here. And we started it when the lockdown extension began, because that's where we thought, we're going to start seeing real spikes in terms of stress and anxiety. Average score in India, 6.1. People in the spectrum was at 28%. Last week was week 2, we repeated it. Average score had already climbed to 6.8. More worryingly, the people who were in the extreme end went up to 46%. And then when we asked them, what is the single biggest thing you're fearful about? What's causing you stress? Job security, irrespective of city, irrespective of organization, irrespective of industry, irrespective of seniority, job security. Now, there are going to be pain through this process. How can I, as a person, manage that? Like, what do I need to do practically to help alleviate some of that real stress and anxiety that I have over whether I'll have my job and what shape that will look like in the future?
So I'm actually going to extend your point a little bit, Marcus, and put it a couple of ways. The scenarios that we're seeing are, you were a really high performer and you have worked really hard in the financial year 2019-20 to hit your target, to exceed it. And you've suddenly come into March where there is a lockdown and you have been told, I'm sorry, that bonus you were promised, that's not happening. And this increment, and maybe you'll even have to take a pay cut. So the extreme, sort of case and that kind of disappointment that you're dealing with is quite high. The second is, of course, a lot of leadership teams and a lot of people are being approached to, sort of just be grateful that they have a job and take a pay cut as a result of it. And of course, we know companies, a lot of them where increments and just bonuses are not being paid. So, or even people who are just being laid off, coming to the market. So it's this entire component of being career resilient, and just to use another form of resiliency that's coming up, has become quite crucial. And whether it's proactively, taking a stand and being able to acknowledge what you can bring, I think there are many steps that you can take to be career resilient. I think the first step is really being able to understand your own skills and capabilities. And there has never been a more important time to be able to understand what you bring to the table, as well as where the gaps are that come in. And the second is really understand the environment and make yourself relevant to the environment. A lot of the CEOs that we coach are telling us the people who were never proactive about their careers earlier, sort of are suddenly calling them and saying, oh, what about this? Let's do this. Let's try this. Let's look at that direction. And they're appreciating it, because at the end of the day, in this sort of a crisis, there is no hierarchy when it comes to finding solutions. So being able to take that step and really make yourself relevant, has become important. And the other side of it is just sort of manage your own expectations. We all wanted to do about 100 things. We all had a lot of plans, and perhaps today you will only get to 5 or 6. And being able to just sort of accept that space is equally important, because what's the flip side of it? You're going to be anxious over things you cannot control. You're going to be anxious in a scenario where everyone is figuring it out, finding solutions to problems that are unknown or immediate. So the flip side of it is an unnecessary amount of stress and anxiety coming through, versus being able to take a calmer and a more structured approach to how do you build your career. And whether that involves, sort of taking more courses, whether it involves just being commercially aware in your own industries, or just being able to find that gap in yourself. And I said, make yourself more relevant in the environment.
It was very useful, very helpful. And the last thing I wanted to ask you about specifically was about the loneliness of leadership.
Yeah.
How do leaders, how can we manage that?
So I think whether we are in a COVID crisis or not, I think leadership has always been a very lonely game. And the top is, whether it's, you can take it to our prime minister, it's an absolutely lonely game when you're at the top of the pyramid. I think it's being able to, sort of build a little bit of an ecosystem of support. I think that's the first step. I think, sort of how do you build, whether it's your mentors, whether it's other peers, whether it's even your leadership team. It's really being able to first build that network of support. The second is, sort of be authentic and transparent, right? I think at this point, our tolerance levels are a lot higher than they've ever been. And people are appreciating that you don't have things figured out. So sometimes crowdsourcing a solution can actually give you a better answer than trying to figure it out on your own. And I think it's just stay connected to people, stay connected to your teams. And I think it's never become more important to be connected than it is today. We're all sitting in our little silos and we're operating. And if you're in the leadership game, you're losing that pulse of what you would get when you walk into an office. So how do you stay connected? How do you, we have leaders who do about 5 random calls a day across their organizations. Just to see the sentiment, just to talk to people, just to understand what's going on, and really find out, how they can lend support or how those people can support them in this journey. And I think it's also just, sort of coming back to that whole point of being able to self-manage, and you can self-manage when you feel like you're a part of the system and not alone in that game. So I think it's really, sort of being able to strategically maneuver these things, and also acknowledge leadership is a little bit of a lonely sport. And at the end of the day, even when you're running, you're playing on a team, if you're playing on a football team, at the end of the day, somebody can, sort of give you the ball, but you have to kick the goal. So, being able to acknowledge where you stand in the ecosystem is also very important.